Hello guys, I hope you guys are doing great. I welcome you to the biology class, and in this video I'm going to be talking about pollination in plants. Okay, so what is pollination? So pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of the same flower or the stigma of another flower. And it is usually said to be the first process of sexual fertilization in flowering plants. So pollen grains actually contain the male gamete and are present in the anthers of the flower. So once the pollen grains move from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower or to the stigma of the same flower, pollination is said to have taken place. So there are several parts of flower that are involved in this pollination, and I'm going to talk about those various parts of flower that are involved in pollination now. So you can see from the picture here, both the male and the female reproductive part of the plant, the stigma, the style, and the ovary, make up the female reproductive part. The anther and the filament make up the male reproductive part of the plant. So both the female and the male reproductive part of the plant work together to bring about pollination in plants. So there are two types of pollination. Number one is self-pollination or auto-pollination. Number two is cross-pollination or mixed pollination. So the first one is self-pollination, and self-pollination simply refers to the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of a flower to the stigma of the same flower. Okay, such pollination occur in a hermaphrodite or dioecious plants, and those are the plants that contain both male and female sexual parts on the same flower. Still talking about self-pollination, it can take place in plants with smaller flowers like peanuts, wheat, rice, tomatoes, and so on. Okay, so what are the advantages of self-pollination? Number one, self-pollination. For self-pollination, there is no diversity in the genes, and therefore the purity of the race is maintained, and that is because it is the only same plant that bears both the pollen grain and then also transfer the pollen grain to the same stigma of the same flower. So there's no mixed rate. Apart from that, the plants also do not depend on external factors before pollination could take place. In fact, a small amount of pollen grain is enough to get the plants pollinated. Meanwhile, there are also disadvantages of self-pollination. One of the disadvantages is that there is no mixing up of genes because it's from the same plant. So there's no mixing up of gene, and there are no new characters or features that are introduced into the lineage of the offspring. Apart from that, self-pollination is also said to reduce the vigor and vitality of the race, as there are no new features that are introduced in the plant. So the second type of pollination is referred to as cross-pollination or mixed pollination, and that means the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of a flower to the stigma of another flower. The two flowers involved has to be flowers of the same species or plant of the same species, though it could be of course different varieties, but it has to be of the same species. In this type of pollination, it could occur or take place in large and brightly colored flowering plants where insects like butterflies and honeybees are attracted by their bright colored flowers. An example of such plants could include apples, strawberries, beans, and so on and so forth. Okay, so there are also advantages of cross-pollination. One of such advantage is that cross-pollination is beneficial to the race of the plant as it introduces new genes into the lineage as a result of the fertilization that takes place between genetically different gametes. Because the fertilization is between varieties of plants, so it introduces a new gene. Apart from that, the seed that is produced as a result of cross pollination, they are also very good seed in vigor and vitality, and that is the only way by which plants that are unisexual can reproduce, because if a plant is unisexual, it can only reproduce through cross pollination. And the disadvantage of cross pollination include number one, there is high wastage of pollen grains. While the pollen grains move from one part, from one flower to the other, it could be wasted. Apart from that, there is high chances that the good qualities may get eliminated during the process. So let's talk about agents of pollination. Talking about agents of pollination, those are the agents or factors that could bring about pollination, whether in cross pollination or self pollination, and they are divided generally into two. You have the abiotic factors and then the biotic factors. So the abiotic factors are the non-living factors, which could include the wind or water, while you have the abiotic factors, which are the living factors. The living factors or biotic factor could be bird or insects or bats or butterfly or bees and other types of living organism. It could even be human being that could bring about pollination.